I'll invite you to go ahead and leave your Bibles marked open to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. If you're here this morning, we appreciate so much your visit. If you look out, you can tell a lot of our family isn't here today. They are traveling for the holidays, or they're visiting family in other parts of the state, and so you kind of help fill in the gaps. And if you have never been here before, we're so grateful that you are here. You absolutely are so valuable and precious in the sight of God, and because we are striving to think like God and not think like the world around us, we value you and we cherish you, and we are grateful for your visit and your time here. We are trying to be a family, and as a result, we kind of go through growing pains, and we fall short at times, and that's kind of what the idea behind this lesson is. If you're looking for a family, that's exactly what we are striving to be. We're just people who are coming together to try and help one another be more like Christ in the way that we think, and the way that we act, and the way that we interact with one another, and also with people outside of these walls. And so if you're interested in looking for a family or finding a family, please, again, don't leave here without letting us get to know you, without expressing your needs to us. We would love to know how we might help you, and in turn how you might help us. Sin is one of those words that we don't like. It's a word that we kind of all innately know it's bad. And yet I can remember coming to the faith and never really thinking a whole lot about what sin is. Sin is kind of one of these ethereal things that isn't tangible. I can't put my hands on quite what it is. I just know it's the bad stuff that I'm not supposed to do. And many of us might jump to the fall of man, or the beginning of God's account in Genesis, where we see God's perfect world ruined by sin. But what exactly is sin? Sin in of itself is defined in a couple verses. Sin is simply described as lawlessness, and the person who is continually practicing sin is the person who is transgressing God's law, according to 1 John 3 and verse 4. Sin is also described later on in John as all unrighteousness. And those two concepts are so important because, yes, all wrongdoing is sin. Doing things that God has not instructed is sin. And oftentimes the old-timers, and I'll let you figure out who the old-timers are, will reference that as sins of commission. And I like that concept, that there is something tangible that I know that God says, don't do this, and I've transgressed that, I've gone beyond that, I've committed it, I've committed sin. Yet there are also sins of omission, things that I failed to do that God has also instructed for me to do. So essentially, sin is just stopping short of what God has instructed us, or going beyond what God has instructed us. And I wish in some ways sin were that simple. But then this guy named Jesus came and he said, look, I know that you've heard it said, sin is committing adultery. And you're like, yeah, I get it. Sin is something I commit. He says, but I'm going to say something to you that is going to be hard for you to hear. And I'm going to take sin beyond things that you just do, and I'm going to involve your actions and your thoughts. I'm going to say to you that, sure, adultery is committing fornication with someone who is not your spouse. But even if you look at someone in a lustful way, you have committed sin. That sin also involves our thoughts and our attitudes as well as our actions. It is all combined into who I am and what I think. And I think that's where sin starts getting tricky, or sin becomes a little bit more poignant to every single one of us in here. That's falling short of what God has asked us to do is not doing things that we're commanded, or doing more than we're commanded. But that I can even be sinful in my thoughts and in my actions. What causes sin? And to that, we go back to our passage in Romans. This passage was really helpful in my own understanding of what sin is. Sin is the wrath or sin invites, the wrath of God. But where does it come from? For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What causes sin in my life? It's ungodliness and unrighteousness. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. This is the consequences of sin. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. The first thing that's revealed to us about where sin comes from, sin comes from this place of ungodliness. What is ungodliness? It's simply not aiming towards God. It's not going in a God direction. That I don't understand what my identity is, who I am, and whose I am. And it looks like not honoring God. It looks like being ungrateful. It looks like not treating God as my creator and my sustainer. That I don't look up and give thanks to God for the things that are in my life, that I look around. Or I look internally. I did this. The world gave me this. This person did this for me. That's where sin begins. That I lose sight of my focus, my purpose, and my responsibility. That I take my eyes off Jesus. I lose sight of who God is. And then I lose sight of my right relationship with God. I lose sight of truth. And all that leads me towards sin. And then the second thing that causes sin is unrighteousness. What is unrighteousness? And this is that Bible class question that when you say, what's the opposite of unrighteousness, no one answers. Because they're like, well, dummy, you just take the un off. Like, that's, you want to know what unrighteousness is? Like, drop the un, and it's righteousness. So I started studying that word, unrighteousness. And sure, unrighteousness is iniquity. Unrighteousness is described as injustice. Unrighteousness is doing bad things in the wrong way. But as I began studying various texts, something jumped out at me. It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness do what? Suppress the truth." Romans 2 and verse 8 speaks like this as well. "But those who are self-seeking do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness." Jesus also spoke like this in Luke 16:11. "If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches?" You want to know the opposite of unrighteousness? It's truth. The opposite of unrighteousness is truth. And this is where in the lesson you're like, so what? Fine. Sin comes from not aiming towards God. Sin comes from a suppression of the truth. But what does that have to do with me? Well, we see the consequences of this play out in the rest of the text that we've read. That sin causes me to go places that I was never anticipating. Sin causes me to be prideful in my attitude and in my thinking. And that's the last cause of sin that we look at. That there's this pride in me. There's this idolatrous pride in me that causes me to look around or look inside instead of looking towards God. And what causes sin in my life outside of the suppression of truth, outside of this unrighteousness, outside of this ungodliness, outside of this pride? God says, when you fall into sin, you fall into accepting a lie. That sin is really getting into this mindset and this attitude that blank will take care of me. Satan says things to us like, God says do this. God says, don't do that, but I will give you a real way to live. Forget all that God stuff. I'm going to give you a true and genuine way to experience life. All you have to do is, and then you fill in your blank. And we buy into that. We think to ourselves, all that God stuff, that's just kind of fantasy. All the things that God has asked me to do or asked me not to do, that's not tangible. That's not real. And so Satan says, look, I'm going to give you something that's tangible. I'm going to give you something that's real, and we accept the lie. Sin is a rejection of reality. Sin is a rejection of reality. It's accepting Satan's fantasy world and failing to live in the truth that God provides. Satan convinces us that God's security isn't enough. So where do I find my security? In my finances. I become consumed with work. I neglect important areas in my life, my family, my health, my giving, alone time with God. I suppress the truth because I've bought into the lie that Satan offers me. And I think as long as I accept this, that's going to provide life for me. God says, you're living in a fantasy. That's not reality. What about this idolatrous pride? Sin comes from being prideful. Pride says, all of my problems would go away if we had more elders, if we had more deacons, if we had more money, if I had this relationship, if I could get this political party in Congress, if I could get this presidential candidate elected. This is my hope. This is what I believe in. So that is what I'm going to worship, and therefore it is my God. Pride says, I got this figured out. I can run the world. I know what God says, but I have the solutions. And if somehow I could get in a position where I can carry out my solutions, it would fix everything. So we build gods. We don't put up statues. We just trust in our bank accounts. We trust in people. We trust in faulty idols. Idols of the heart. Idols that we've made. Idols that we've taken the incorruptible God and we've exchanged it for something corruptible. And we say, this God that I've made, that will take care of me. And so what are the effects of sin? We see that sin leads to corruption. I do whatever I want. And then outside of just giving in to my passions, they get worse until I can't understand or discern what is truth and what is not truth. That I can't understand where the barrier is, where the line is. At first, I gave into my passions. I knew there was a stopping point. I pursued them. But it was all within this little box that I created. But what happens once I give in to that passion? Well, then I've got to go further and further and further. And that's what sin does. You see that from the very beginning. Adam and Eve suppress truth. They desire to be like God. They desire to be wise in the way God is wise. And what does it leave them? Naked and afraid. It robbed them of their peace, and then later would rob them of a son. What about the book of Judges? In the book of Judges, the people of God come into a land. They conquer the land. It is like one of the most amazing things that you have ever read in Scripture. How easily they are able to take out army upon army. But then sin comes into the camp. And then the book of Judges ends with some of the most hideous and heinous things that you could ever read in Scripture. People are raping one another. There's war. There's kidnapping. And how does the book of Judges end? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. If you're a liar, you understand the concept of corruption. And I'll just tell you from my personal experience. Like in times in my life where I've struggled with honesty, I always say to myself, I'm just going to say this one lie. It is going to be this one lie and that's it. But that's never it. You say the one lie and then you have to keep it going. And then you have to act in ways that make you look like your lie is the truth. It enslaves you. It makes you do things you don't want to do. All of a sudden you're suspicious of everyone. And you don't even know what's true anymore because you've given in to everything. And your mind is corrupted and enslaved. Romans 6, verse 16 talks about this, that there are two options for the person. We either present ourselves as slaves of obedience or slaves of sin. Whenever you give in to sin, you give in to the lie, right? And your lie that you tell yourself is, I am free to do this sin, and this sin will not bring any consequences. For those of you that have struggled with lust in your life, isn't that how it starts? Look, I'm just going to look at these photos. I'm just going to look at this magazine. I'm just going to watch these videos on TikTok. Look, it'll be this one and only time. Or I'm going to watch this pornographic video and that's it. That's the last time. I'm done. That's not true. Sin grabs you and it enslaves you. That gossip that you share, you get the rush from sharing some information and everyone's circling around you. Oh, what do they know? What do they know? What do they know? And that gossip is addicting. And you just can't wait to have everyone look and focus on you. What about being disobedient to parents? Man, I can remember being 16. This was 17 years ago now. I can remember being 16. And 16 was a hard year for me. It was a really hard year for me in the sense of I was trying to figure out who I was going to be. And I remember the first time that I poignantly lied to my mom at 16. You know what happened a couple months later? I was sneaking out of my house at night. This is not recorded, right? I was stealing the car. What started off as just being rebellious led me to a point where I just didn't even care about authority anymore. What did I get from my slavery of sin? I got death. Because I bought into the lies and the fantasy. I was robbed of joy, I was robbed of contentment, and I was going towards death. So what do we do about this? Like, this would be a horrible place to end the lesson, right? What ought to be our response to sin? I'm going to offer a few ones. The first response that I think is appropriate to have is that I've got to have the right perspective. We live in a broken and a sinful world. And that's the way it's been since Genesis 3. And that's the way it's going to continue to be. God says in His Word in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4 that there is a God of this world, but it's not God. It is Satan. Satan is running the show. He's running the lives of most people that we interact with. 1 John 5 and verse 19, we know that we are from God. But what about the rest of the world? They're just kind of good-hearted people, right? The whole world lies in the power of the evil one. This is the world that we live in. And it's a truth that we have to accept. But the problem when we accept that truth, that we live in a sinful and a broken world, is we have incorrect responses to that. Sometimes when we realize that we live in a sinful and a broken world, we think, well, I'm just going to conform to the world. I'm just going to be like the world. I'm just going to be like those people around me. But as long as I continue sitting in a pew on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesdays, and I occasionally pray to God while there's a hot plate of food in front of me, then on Judgment Day, God's going to let me slip in. We can't conform to the world. And I think we all know that, and we all understand that, and we believe that. But there's another response that is unbiblical. And it's this idea that well, somehow I can control the world. I know I can't be like the world. I know I can't dress like the world and think like the world. But you know what? I can get the world to accept my thinking. I can get the world to accept my standards. God put me here so that I can have sway over the world. God says the world is under the control of the evil one. And Satan is going to get you to think thoughts like this. Yeah. The government, it's on your side. It's not. It has never been, and it never will be. The world is under the evil one. Our pride leads us to think, well, I can control the world. I think that I'm winning some great geopolitical battle for God, or I'm winning these battles for God socially. Maybe. Probably not. And Satan will continue to give us small victories to believe in this lie. My fate is directly tied to this political party that's in power. My fate is directly tied to whatever is on the church building sign. My fate is directly tied, and you can fill in all the blanks that you want. That is the lie. Your fate is not tied to the city. Your fate is not tied to this country, and it's not tied to this world. So how do I respond? I understand that I'm an ambassador. What does an ambassador do? Does an ambassador disassociate from the country that they live in? No, they learn the language. They eat the foods. They come to understand the culture. But when they're in that country, they understand that my loyalties lie somewhere else. My loyalties lie somewhere else. And I'm an ambassador, and I will be a good ambassador. But my loyalties lie somewhere else. And the way that we respond, outside of trying to conform to the world, outside of trying to control the world, is simply respond with gospel promotion. Look, you're a part of this kingdom. You're a part of this world right now. It's just leading you to corruption. And it's leading you to be enslaved. And it's leading you to death. I want to invite you to come and understand that there's a different king. I want you to come to understand that there's a different kingdom that you get to be a part of. And if you want out of that kingdom that has your fate tied to it, let me bring you into a kingdom of a constant and a consistent God. I want to draw your focus out of the temporary things and turn them towards the eternal ones. Because that's what your Creator desires. You get to leave your king and you get to leave your kingdom that is marked by death. And you get to come into a kingdom that is real and offers life. That's how we respond to a sinful world. We don't conform. We don't control. We try to influence the world where we can, but ultimately our goal is to influence people to be loyal to the true King and to his kingdom. So we promote the gospel through prayer, through fervent prayer. We promote the gospel through our daily lives, our behavior, our speech. We promote the gospel through our use of this life's resources. And then we understand that when I fall into sin, I get to respond differently. What do we do when we sin? And yes, did y'all know that we sin? Did y'all know that we fall short? Did you all know that we respond to things incorrectly? Well, as Christians, we've got to expect and we've got to desire holiness in one another. We've got to expect and we've got to desire holiness in one another. We have to then accept discipline and correction from one another. You can't keep acting like this. You can't keep professing to know God and then deny Him with your deeds. Now understand, brethren, we're not trying to beat each other up. We are trying to save someone's soul, though. Brother, sister, look, I see this thing in your life, and it's not matching up with the righteousness that God has revealed. And I don't want you to be corrupted. I don't want you to be enslaved. I don't want you to die. I want something better for you. And guess what? Jesus does too. I don't know what the root of your sin is. I don't know what's going on in your life, but I know that there's something wrong. And I want to help you fix this. And so you've done that one-on-one. You've talked to your brother one-on-one. And then you realize nothing changed. Your brother is still corrupted and enslaved and headed to death. So what do? All right, look, I got to find 2 or 3 more people. You guys got to come with me. Like, there's a serious problem with our brother. They're just dead. We got to go help them. And so you bring those 2 or 3 along. And then what do? When that doesn't work, and you want it to work, you say, we got to get the family together. And you bring your family together because you know, I need this person to live, and I really want them to live. Like, this isn't the fun stuff when it comes to preaching. This is not the stuff that everyone's jumping at the bits to preach on. But we need to talk about these things because it's heaven or hell. And here's the thing, brethren. If I'm in sin, I don't need you to put a smile on your face. I don't need you to watch me die. I need you to wake me up and help me. And I need multiples of you to help me and to say, you can do better. You ought to do better. Because that's what it takes sometimes. And we don't like this. We don't like the drama. We don't like the awkwardness. We want just peace and tranquility in our lives. But did you know that Jesus had peace and tranquility in his life? But Jesus sought drama in this sense. He sought the awkward situation in this sense. He left his throne to come and be involved in our drama. He left his throne to come and say things that were going to be difficult to hear and would cause us to feel uncomfortable and awkward. Why did Jesus do that? So that we could experience true life. He wanted to save us. And if you're here this morning, that is our goal too. I hope that you're here this morning because you want people to help you. You want people to help you be like God. You want people who aren't just going to smile at you in the lobby and say, good to see you. You want people who are going to be texting you and calling you and emailing you and saying, look, I'm on my way to heaven. Like, I want you here with me. And I want you to go and bring others too. Brethren, I don't do a good job of this. And I don't know who does a great job of this. We often categorize sins in our minds. We say, look, these sins are the sins I can let slide. When it's the really bad stuff, then I have to make a change. But all the other stuff is not a big deal. We've got to change our thinking. That is the effect of sin in our life, corrupting our minds. God is trying to change everything in your life. And I will just tell you the way it is. If you don't want to change, if you're very happy and content in your life, man, the gospel in this church has nothing to offer you. If you are content and happy in your life, the gospel in this church has nothing to offer you. Because we come here broken and ready to change. Because God is trying to change us. He's saying, I know that you're struggling with ungodly and unrighteous thoughts. I know that you're motivated by pride, but I just want you to come and talk to me. And if God invites us to talk to him, then you better believe that I'm going to invite you to talk to me too. And I'm okay with being the punching bag. If you need to tell me, look, JP, you're not doing this right, do it. Even if you don't think it's a big deal, I'm asking you to help me. I'm asking you to talk to me. Because I'm not just trying to be a little bit better. I am trying to be like Jesus Christ. I am trying to be a child of God. Now, don't be a hater, okay? But help me. Help me. And the last point that I want to make in this morning's lesson How do we respond to sin? We respond like Jesus does. People who are trying to be like Jesus understand that we have to be patient with one another. And we have to be willing to forgive great, tremendous harm that was done to us. But we don't let sin take control of us. We respond with grace and truth. So if you're here this morning and you are in sin, I'm going to tell you what God is telling you. You need to repent. And you need to change. Because God said through his word, I'm dying so that you won't die. If you're here this morning, you need to believe in the gospel, but you don't know what the gospel is, don't leave here without asking for help. Man, we have men and women, families, singles, widows that want to study with you. And we are trying to help everyone overcome sin. You can repent today. You can experience salvation today. And I want to say one last thing, and the lesson will be yours. I think sometimes when you preach a lesson or we just talk about sin in our Bible classes and in our homes and in our personal studies, we walk away feeling ashamed and guilty. And that's not my goal this morning. I don't want anyone here to walk away feeling that your sin is worse than anyone else's. God died to give you life. And you have an opportunity this morning. You have an opportunity this morning to experience the reality of what God is trying to offer you. So if you need the prayers of the congregation here, if you've been struggling with sin your whole life, if you have been struggling with whatever sin your whole life, talk to someone. Talk to someone. Don't be ashamed of it. Just talk to someone. And if you're ready to put on Christ this morning, we're ready to do that as well. If there's any way that we can help you be more like Christ today, we ask that you'll think about your life as we all stand and as we sing the song of encouragement.